The room went silent before he even finished his sentence. Not the kind of silence that falls when someone drops something. The kind that falls when something breaks that cannot be put back together. The kind where 30 people stop typing, stop breathing, stop pretending they are not watching. Shin Juno stood in the middle of the open floor of Shin Global Industries' Seoul headquarters, and he pointed at Imani Carter like she was a problem he had finally decided to solve. Your contract is terminated, effective immediately. That was it. No preamble. No meeting room. No human resources representative standing nearby with a folder and a rehearsed expression. Just his voice, flat and final, cutting across the hum of the air conditioning and landing on her like a hand across the face. Imani did not flinch. She had learned a long time ago that flinching gave people exactly what they wanted. So instead, she set down her pen slowly, the way her mother had taught her. Slowly, baby, always slowly, because slow means you are still in control, and she looked at him. Not with anger. Not with tears threatening the corners of her eyes. She looked at him the way a woman looks at something she already knew was coming and had already decided how to handle. The junior analyst 3 desks away, a young Korean woman named Sua, made a small sound with her mouth. Like she had started to say something and swallowed it back down. Everyone else stayed perfectly still. I will need the access badge returned before you reach the elevator, Juno said. His voice did not waver. His jaw was set. He was wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Imani's monthly rent back in Atlanta, and he was standing straight in the way of a man who had been trained since childhood to never let his shoulders drop in public. But his eyes were doing something his face refused to do. They were moving, just slightly, just enough, between Imani's face and the small framed photograph on her desk. The one she had carried with her from Atlanta to Seoul, wrapped in a silk scarf inside her carry-on bag, because some things you do not check. The photograph was of a woman. Brown-skinned, beautiful, with eyes that carried the same steady quality as the woman now rising from her chair. Imani stood up. She reached for the photograph first. She held it against her chest with one hand. With the other, she unpinned her access badge from the lapel of her blazer and set it on the desk without looking at it again. Then she picked up her bag. She did not say a word. She did not need to. Her silence said everything that 30 years of her mother's unfinished business had been waiting to say. She walked toward the elevator with her back straight and her steps even. She passed Sua's desk without looking sideways. She passed the glass-walled conference room where she had spent the last 6 weeks turning over numbers that did not add up. She passed the framed portraits of Shin Global's founders on the wall. Old men in dark suits, frozen in black and white, watching her go. She pressed the elevator button. She waited. She felt every eye in that room on her back like heat, and she let them look. The elevator opened. She stepped in. The doors closed. The last thing she saw before they shut completely was Shin Juno, still standing in the middle of the floor, with the expression of a man who had just done something his father told him to do and had not yet decided whether he could live with it. The parking garage was cool and dim and smelled like concrete and exhaust. Imani stood beside her rental car with the photograph still held against her chest. She was not shaking. She had promised herself she would not shake until she was alone, truly alone, behind a locked door with the lights off, and she intended to keep that promise. She opened her bag and took out her phone. She had one call to make. She had known for 3 days that she might need to make it. She had hoped she was wrong. She was not wrong. She found the contact. She pressed call. It rang twice. A man's voice answered, smooth and precise, the voice of someone who had been waiting for this exact moment. "Miss Carter," he said. "I take it today is the day." "Today is the day," she said. She heard him exhale, not with surprise, but with the quiet satisfaction of a chess player who has just watched the board arrange itself exactly as he calculated. "My car will be there in 12 minutes," he said. She lowered the phone. And that was when she heard footsteps behind her. Not the measured click of dress shoes. Running. Someone was running across the concrete floor of the parking garage, and the sound bounced off every wall, and she turned slowly because she already knew. Shin Juno was coming toward her with his tie loosened and his composure, the composure that the entire 43rd floor feared and organized their workdays around, completely gone. He stopped 3 feet in front of her. His chest was moving with his breath. He was looking at her with something she had not seen in his face in 6 weeks of working under the same roof. He was looking at her like she was the only solid thing in a room that had started to spin. And then Shin Juno, CEO of Shin Global Industries, son of Shin Byung-chul, a man who had never in his professional life shown weakness in a semi-public space, bent forward in a full, formal, deep bow. Not a corporate nod. Not a polite incline of the head. A real bow. The kind that, in Korean culture, is reserved for moments of profound respect or genuine, aching apology. He held it for 3 full seconds. When he straightened, he looked at her and said, "Please, come back. I will explain everything." Imani looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked down at her phone. 12 minutes, the man had said. But something told her, something in the way Juno's hands were not quite steady at his sides, something in the way he had run, that whatever explanation he was carrying, it was bigger than the firing. It was older than the firing. It had something to do with the photograph she was holding against her chest. She opened her mouth. What she said next stopped him completely. What did she say? And what did Juno already know, before this morning, before the termination order, before any of it began? The answer goes back 6 weeks. And it starts with a woman who never meant to come to Seoul at all. If you believe a woman's dignity is worth more than any paycheck, you're going to want to stay for this story. Subscribe so you don't miss a single part of this story. This is exactly the kind of story we tell here. Some stories are not just about what happens. They're about the strength it takes to stand your ground, to protect your dignity, and to demand respect, even when the world tries to take it from you. If you've ever had to make a choice that tested your courage, or refused to be bought, silenced, or pushed aside, then you're in the right place. This channel tells stories about women who cannot be broken, and the people who learn, sometimes too late, that integrity cannot be bought. Welcome to Afro Korean Tales and Stories. 6 weeks earlier, Imani Carter almost did not get on the plane. She had been sitting in Hartsfield-Jackson Airport in Atlanta with her carry-on between her feet and a coffee she had not touched going cold in her hand, and she had spent 45 minutes arguing with herself about whether she was making the biggest mistake of her life. Her best friend Rochelle had driven her to the airport and walked her to the security line and then grabbed both of Imani's hands and looked at her with the expression of a woman who has known someone for 30 years and has run out of gentle ways to say what needs to be said. "You don't have to do this," Rochelle said. "I know. Your mother would not want you walking into that place on her behalf. You don't know that. Imani. Baby." Rochelle squeezed her hands. Dorothy spent the last 10 years of her life trying to put Korea behind her. She never talked about it. She never wanted you to go digging. Imani looked at the security line. She looked at the gate number on the board above them. She thought about the sealed box she had found under her mother's bed 3 months after the funeral, the box with the Shin Global letterhead on every document inside it, the names, the numbers, the small neat handwriting that was her mother's, documenting things that a junior financial analyst in 1987 should not have had access to and definitely should not have been writing down in secret. "She never told me not to go," Imani said. She picked up her carry-on. She kissed Rochelle on the cheek. She walked through security without looking back, because she knew that if she looked back, she would see Rochelle's face, and Rochelle's face would break her resolve, and 30 years of her mother's silence would win again. She got on the plane. Seoul was not what she expected. She did not know what she had expected. Something colder, perhaps, something more distant, but the city that met her when she came out of Incheon Airport was alive in a way that surprised her. Not loud exactly. More like purposeful. Like a city that had decided to keep moving no matter what. The Shin Global offices were in Gangnam, on the 43rd floor of a glass tower that reflected the Han River on clear mornings. Imani arrived on a Tuesday quietly, with a rolling suitcase and a name badge that said Intern, which made the security guard at the front desk look at her twice, because she was clearly not 22 years old, and she was clearly not lost. She smiled at him politely and took her badge and went upstairs. The office was open plan and humming. Mostly Korean staff, a few international faces scattered through. Nobody said anything to her directly that first morning. There was a desk assigned to her in the middle of the floor, generic and cleared, with a company laptop and a stack of onboarding documents in a green folder. She sat down. She opened the folder. She began to read. She placed her mother's photograph on the corner of the desk. Brown-skinned, beautiful, steady eyes. She did not tell anyone who the woman in the photograph was. She met Shin Juno on her third day. She had been in the building 2 full days before she saw him in person. She had heard his name spoken in the particular way that people say the name of someone they are slightly afraid of, a slight lowering of the voice, a slight straightening of the back. She had seen the 43rd floor adjust itself whenever the glass door of the corner office opened. On the third day, the glass door opened and he walked out. He was taller than she had pictured. That was the first thing. Lean and composed in the way of a man who exercises because he cannot afford to not because he enjoys it. He was moving through the floor quickly, speaking in Korean to a senior manager who was walking slightly behind him and slightly faster than was comfortable, the way people do when they are trying to keep up with someone who has forgotten how to slow down. He passed her desk. He stopped. He looked at her, not at her face first, but at the photograph. Just for a half second. Just long enough for something to move across his expression that was there and gone before Imani could name it. Then he looked at her. "You are the new intern," he said in English. Not a question. "Yes," she said. He looked at her for another moment. Then he said, "Welcome to Shin Global," in a tone that was professionally warm and personally closed, and he walked on. She watched him go. She had been doing this kind of work long enough to know the difference between a man who looked at her and saw a resume and a man who looked at her and felt something he did not expect. Juno had felt something he did not expect. She filed that away and went back to her documents. On the 14th day, she found it. She had been working through 6 quarters of subsidiary financial reports. Mundane, detailed work that the senior analysts had apparently not bothered to reconcile properly for 3 years. Nobody had asked her to go that deep. She had gone that deep because going that deep was who she was. It was a small number, at first. A transfer amount that appeared in one subsidiary's outflow column but did not appear in any corresponding inflow column anywhere in the consolidated report. Not a large number. Not the kind of number that screams fraud. The kind of number that whispers it. She pulled the thread carefully, the way you pull a loose stitch from a sweater when you don't yet know whether you'll unravel a seam or a sleeve or the whole garment. She built a spreadsheet on her personal laptop, not the company device, and she began mapping the transfers. By the end of the day, the whisper was getting louder. She saved the file. She encrypted it. She closed her personal laptop and put it in her bag. She picked up the framed photograph from the corner of her desk and looked at her mother's face for a long moment. Then she opened the company database one more time. She searched a name. Not a financial term. Not a subsidiary code. A name. Dorothy A. Carter. 1987. The result came back in under 2 seconds. There was a file. Sealed. Marked with a classification code she had not seen anywhere else in the system. Her hands did not shake. But her breath did. She did not open the file. Not yet. Not here. Not on a company device. But it was there. Her mother had been in this system for 37 years. Buried, classified, sealed. And now her daughter was sitting at a desk 20 feet from the CEO's office, with a file glowing on the screen in front of her, and a personal laptop in her bag that was already beginning to tell a story. The question was not whether she would open it. The question was what would happen when she did. And who else in this building was watching her closely enough to know that she had already started looking. That night, when she got home to her Seoul apartment and put her key in the door, something stopped her. The door was not fully closed. She had locked it that morning. She was certain of it. She pushed it open slowly. The apartment was undisturbed. Everything in its place. Nothing visibly missing. Except for the notepad on the kitchen table where she had written, in her own handwriting, the subsidiary code she was investigating. The notepad was there. The page with the code was gone. Someone was already watching her. Someone inside that building knew exactly what she was looking for, and they had moved first. But what they didn't know was what Imani had already moved 2 days before they did. Strong women recognize strong women. If this story speaks to you, Subscribe and stay so you don't miss what happens next. Imani did not call the police. She stood in the kitchen of her Seoul apartment and looked at the notepad with a torn edge where the page had been, and she made a deliberate decision not to call anyone. Not Rochelle. Not the building manager. Not the small, understaffed intern coordinator at Shin Global who had handed her a welcome packet on day one and had not spoken to her since. She made this decision in about 4 seconds. Because calling anyone official meant announcing that she had been targeted. And announcing that she had been targeted meant whoever took that page would know exactly how rattled she was, and more importantly, how close she had gotten. She was not going to give them that. She set her bag down on the kitchen chair. She went to the window and looked out at the Seoul night. The city lit up in layers, neon and fluorescent, and the distant red of tower warning lights blinking slowly in the dark. She stood there for a while, breathing steadily, letting the initial cold wave of it move through her body and pass. Then she went to her suitcase in the bedroom, unzipped the inner lining, and removed a small USB drive she had taped to the frame 3 days after she arrived. Everything she had found so far was on it. Every spreadsheet. Every transfer record. Every subsidiary code. Copies. She had made copies before she had ever written anything on paper. Because her mother had raised her to understand that the most dangerous thing a woman in a foreign system can be is unprepared. She held the drive in her palm and felt, for the first time all evening, something that was not quite calm but was close enough to function. She sat down on the edge of the bed and opened her mother's letters. Dorothy Carter had written them over a span of 8 months in 1987, handwritten on thin airmail paper in the small, disciplined print of a woman who had learned that her words might one day need to be read by someone who wasn't her. Some of the letters were addressed to Imani's grandmother back in Atlanta. Some were addressed to no one in particular, which Imani had come to understand meant they were addressed to whoever was brave enough to find them. She had read them all a dozen times. Tonight she needed to read them again, slowly, because she was inside the building they described. She was living in the city they described. And she needed to hear her mother's voice. "The numbers don't add up, Mama," Dorothy had written in a letter dated March 1987. "I've been going over the Q1 reports for 3 weeks and there's something wrong in the subsidiary transfers. I showed Mr. O, the senior analyst, and he told me I was reading the format incorrectly. But I'm not reading it incorrectly. I've been doing this for 4 years. I know what I'm reading." Imani turned the page. "No one will look at it. I've asked twice now and both times I've been redirected to other work. I don't know if they can't see it or if they won't. I'm starting to think it's the second one." Another page. "There's a name that keeps appearing in the transfer records. Not a Shin Global subsidiary name. A different company entirely. An American company. I wrote it down but I'm going to be careful about who I show it to. Something doesn't feel right. The atmosphere changed after I started asking questions. People who used to eat lunch with me are suddenly very busy." The last letter, dated May 1987, was shorter than the others. "They're letting me go. Mr. Shin called me into his office this morning and said the project I was brought over to work on had concluded and my contract would not be renewed. He was very polite. He offered me a car to the airport. He did not look at me once during the whole conversation. Not once, Mama. Not once in 8 minutes. I know what I found. I know it's real. But I don't have enough and I can't get enough now. So I'm coming home. I'm going to put this away and I'm going to try to let it go. I just want you to know that I tried. I tried to do the right thing. I want that written down somewhere." Imani folded the letter carefully along its original creases. She held it in both hands. She thought about her mother sitting in this same city, in some small rented room not unlike this one, writing those words by lamplight and then folding them just as carefully and believing, with the full faith of a woman who had done everything right, that trying was enough. Dorothy Carter had come home. She had married. She had raised Imani alone after Imani's father left. She had worked and loved, and grown quieter every year in a way that Imani had only understood in retrospect. In the years after Dorothy's death, reading these letters, learning the shape of the silence her mother had worn for 3 decades like a second skin. Dorothy had tried to let it go. She had never let it go. Imani was still sitting on the bed at 11 o'clock when her phone buzzed. A text from a number she did not recognize. A Seoul area code. You are not the first Carter to sit in that building and find what you are looking for. Stop before it costs you what it cost her. She read it 3 times. Then she screenshot it, sent the image to her encrypted cloud folder, and typed back one word. Who are you? No response came. She put the phone face down on the bed. She looked at the ceiling. Whoever had sent that message knew her name, knew her mother's name, knew what she was looking for, and had gotten close enough to her apartment to take a page from her notepad. That meant this was not just an old buried secret. Someone was actively protecting it. She thought about David then. She had not thought about him in weeks, which was its own kind of progress. But Seoul had a way of pulling him back. Not his face exactly, but the feeling she associated with him. The feeling of being in a place where she was an anomaly, where people looked at her not with cruelty but with a kind of unsettled curiosity, like she was a word in a sentence they had not expected. David had loved her. She believed that. But his mother had looked at Imani the same way, not with hatred, just with that same unsettled curiosity, and David had eventually chosen the feeling his mother was comfortable with over the woman his heart had chosen. He had given the ring back. He had been gentle about it. That almost made it worse. Imani did not carry bitterness about that anymore. She had processed it, put it in its proper place, continued. But Seoul lived in that same emotional neighborhood, and on nights like this one, alone, targeted, sitting with her mother's letters, the walls between neighborhoods got thin. She was not here for love. She was here for Dorothy. She needed to remember that. She was back at her desk at 7:30 the next morning, early enough that the office was still mostly empty. She opened the company database again, from the company laptop, carefully, the way she would enter any space she did not fully control. She searched the sealed file again. Dorothy A. Carter, 1987. Still there. Still sealed. But this morning there was something she had not noticed the day before. A second classification code attached to the file. Smaller. Below the main code. She wrote it down. On her phone this time, not on paper. She recognized the format of the code. It was not an internal Shin Global code. It was a format she had seen once before, years ago, in a completely different context. It was an external company identifier. An American company. The same one her mother had been careful about naming. Her pulse did not spike. Her face did not change. She had trained herself over years of this kind of work to keep her body neutral when her mind was running fast. She closed the database. She looked up toward the corner office. The glass door was closed. The blinds were partially drawn. But through the narrow gap in the blinds, she could see Shin Juno standing at his desk, not working. Just standing. Looking out at the floor the way a man looks at something he is not sure how to handle. His gaze moved, slowly, to her desk. Their eyes met through the gap in the blinds. Neither of them looked away for a full 3 seconds. Then his phone rang. He turned. He picked it up. And the expression that crossed his face when he heard the voice on the other end was the expression of a man receiving an order he had been dreading. She didn't know yet who was on that phone. But she would. And when she found out, it would connect every single thread. Her mother's letters, the missing page, the sealed file, and the reason Shin Juno's hands had gone very still when he looked at her photograph on the very first day. If you've ever had to stand alone to protect your dignity, this channel was made for you. The call lasted 4 minutes. Imani could not hear what was being said. She could only watch through the narrow gap in the blinds as Juno stood at his desk with the phone pressed to his ear and his free hand very still against his thigh. Not relaxed. Still. The difference between those two things was something a woman like Imani had learned to read early. In boardrooms, in negotiations, in the quiet before a man decided to say something that would change everything. He was receiving instructions. He did not argue. He did not nod very much. He listened. And then, near the end of the call, he turned slightly and looked in the direction of the floor, in the direction of her desk, and something passed over his face that Imani could not fully read from where she was sitting. It was not anger. It was not coldness. It looked, from this distance, like conflict. The call ended. He set the phone down. He stood at his desk for a moment without moving. Then he did something she had not seen in 4 weeks of watching this floor operate. He came out of his office without a purpose. Without a meeting to walk into, without a manager trailing him, without the forward momentum that characterized every other time he moved through this space. He walked to the small kitchen area at the edge of the floor. He poured a cup of coffee. He stood at the counter and drank it slowly, looking out the window at the Han River. Imani watched him. She was supposed to be cross-referencing a set of quarterly figures. Her eyes were on her screen. Her attention was completely on him. After 3 minutes, he refilled the cup. He looked down at it. Then he walked to her desk. He set the second cup down beside her keyboard. "Black," he said simply. "That is how you take it." It was not a question. He had noticed. She looked at the cup. She looked up at him. "Thank you," she said. He gave a single nod and turned back toward his office. He had taken 4 steps when he stopped, his back still to her. "The subsidiary reconciliation files you were assigned," he said. "How far have you gone?" She did not hesitate. "Through Q2 of last year." A pause. "That is thorough," he said. "That is the work," she said. Another pause. Smaller. He walked back into his office. The glass door closed behind him. Imani looked at the coffee cup for a moment. Then she picked it up and drank. He had noticed how she took her coffee. He had noticed how far she had gone into the files. He was not a man who noticed things by accident. Which meant the call she had just watched him receive was, in all likelihood, about her. And he had brought her coffee anyway. She filed that away too. That evening, she did not go straight home. She went to a small tea house 3 blocks from her apartment, tucked between a dry cleaner and a convenience store, easy to miss, which was why she liked it. She sat at the low table near the back and ordered ginger tea and opened her personal laptop. She had 2 hours of work to do before she could sleep. The American company identifier she had found attached to her mother's sealed file. She had been searching it carefully, in fragments, never the full string in a single search. Spreading the inquiry so that no single search looked like what it was. It was painstaking work. It was also the only safe way to do it. Tonight, after 2 weeks of fragments, the picture was becoming clear. The company was a mid-tier American import-export firm that had operated out of Atlanta between 1983 and 1994. Dissolved in 1994. Its filings were partially public record. Imani had a contact at a business registry database back in the States, a former colleague who owed her a professional favor, and she had asked him, carefully and without explanation, to pull the full corporate record. He had sent her a compressed file that afternoon. She opened it now. The registered officers of the company. The founding documents. The dissolution papers. She went through them methodically, the way her mother had gone through Shin Global's reports in 1987. Carefully. Without rushing. Letting the numbers and names arrange themselves into meaning. She was on page 7 of the dissolution documents when she saw a name she recognized. Her tea went cold. She did not notice. She read the name 3 times to make sure she was not making an error. She was not making an error. The name on the dissolution documents, listed as a silent partner, a financial backer of the company that had been receiving Shin Global's irregular transfers for over a decade, was a name from Atlanta. From her mother's world. From the small, close community of people who had gathered around Dorothy Carter in her later years, who had brought food when she was sick, who had sat in the front pew at her funeral. Someone who Imani had trusted without question her entire life. She closed the laptop slowly. She sat in the tea house with the sound of the city outside and her hands flat on the table and the particular cold clarity of a woman who has just understood that she is more alone in this than she had believed. 2 miles away, in the Shin family residence in a quiet residential neighborhood in Songbuk-dong, Shin Byung-chul sat in his study and looked at the report his assistant had prepared. He was 74 years old and still had the posture of a man who considered slouching a form of moral failure. His study was lined with books he had actually read, awards he genuinely deserved, and photographs of a life built from almost nothing into something formidable. The report was 3 pages long. It was about Imani Carter. He read it the way he read everything. Completely, without expression, extracting only what mattered. Her age. her professional background, her mother's name. He had known, the moment his assistant told him a Carter had been hired as an intern, that it was not a coincidence. There was no version of this that was a coincidence. The daughter of Dorothy Carter did not end up at a Shin Global desk by accident. He turned to the second page. She had already accessed the subsidiary reconciliation files. She had already searched his mother's, Dorothy's, name in the system. She had not opened the sealed file, but she had found the secondary classification code attached to it, which meant she was close. He sat for a long time. Then he picked up the phone and called his son. "There is an intern on the 43rd floor," he said when Juno answered. "Her name is Carter. I need her removed from the building before the end of this week." Silence on the other end. "Juno," he said. The single word carried 32 years of expectation. "Yes, father," Juno said. He hung up. He sat in his study and looked at the photograph on his desk. Himself, young, standing in front of the Shin Global building at its opening, 20 years old, the future stretched out in every direction. He thought about Dorothy Carter. He thought about a decision he had made in 1987 that he had told himself was business, had told himself was necessary, had told himself he could live with. He had lived with it. He had lived with it for 37 years. But it was still there. The way a fracture is still there in a bone that has healed, invisible in normal light, clear under pressure. He closed the report. He did not allow himself to think about whether the daughter had her mother's eyes. Juno received that call and obeyed. But what his father did not know, what no one in that building knew yet, was that on the same evening Byung-chul made his decision, Imani had already sent one email. One carefully worded, strategically timed email to a man in Seoul who had been waiting a very long time for exactly this kind of invitation. If you're a woman who believes that respect is worth more than any paycheck, this is the channel for you. These are the stories we tell here. She had drafted the email 4 days ago. She had not sent it then because she was not certain. She needed to be certain. She had spent her entire adult life making sure that when she moved correctly. Not rashly, not emotionally, not in the way that people who underestimated her were always quietly waiting for her to move. Her mother had moved without enough cover. Dorothy had found the truth and trusted that truth would protect her. It had not protected her. Imani was not going to make that mistake. The name on the dissolution documents had shaken her. She would not pretend otherwise, not to herself, not in the private and honest space of her own mind, but it had not broken her. It had, in fact, clarified something she had been circling for days. It told her that this was not just about Shin Global. This ran through 2 countries. It ran through Atlanta. It ran through people she had shared tables with and received embraces from and trusted in the way you trust family. Which meant she could not trust anyone in her immediate world with what she knew. She needed someone with distance. Someone with power of their own. Someone who had his own reasons to want Shin Global's buried records opened. She had sent the email at 11:47 the previous night, from a secondary account she had created specifically for this purpose. Chairman Park Sungjin of Myri Solutions had replied within 20 minutes. "Miss Carter, I have been expecting to hear from someone like you for some time. When are you available to speak?" They had spoken that morning, early, before she came into the office. 45 minutes on a call that she had taken in the stairwell of her apartment building with her voice low and her back to the wall. Chairman Park was 71 years old and had spent the last 15 years building Myri Solutions into the second-largest investment firm in South Korea. He was known for 3 things: his patience, his precision, and the particular quality of his stillness that, in business meetings, tended to make the person across from him start talking too much. He and Shin Byung-chul had been rivals since the 1990s. Not enemies, rivals. A different and more durable thing. Imani had found Chairman Park's name attached to a filing from 1994, a regulatory complaint he had made against the same dissolved American company, a complaint that had been reviewed and quietly closed without outcome. He had tried, 15 years before Imani was sitting in a Seoul tea house, to pull the same thread she was pulling. He had not had what she had. He had not had Dorothy Carter's letters. "I have documentation you've never seen," she had told him on the call. Primary source material from 1987. The analyst who found the original transfers, before they were buried, kept records. Silence on his end. The chairman's particular quality of stillness, even through a phone line. "And what do you want in return?" he had asked. "Not money," she had said. "Not a position. I want one thing. I want it to be on record, officially, permanently, publicly, that Dorothy A. Carter found this first. That she reported it correctly. That she was removed from her position specifically because she was right." Another silence. That he had said, "I can arrange." She arrived at the office that morning knowing it might be her last day. Not because she planned to leave, but because she had been in enough high-stakes situations to understand that when the board starts moving, the pieces on the floor often get cleared without warning. If Shin Byung-chul had decided she was a problem, and the text message, the missing page, the sealed file all suggested he had decided this some time ago, then she could be removed at any moment, by any mechanism. She had prepared accordingly. Every document she needed was already secured. Multiple copies in multiple locations. One with Rochelle in Atlanta, delivered via a courier service Imani had used before, sealed and labeled with instructions. One with a lawyer she trusted, on retainer, who did not yet know the full picture but knew enough to act if Imani went silent for more than 48 hours. And one on the USB drive taped to the lining of her suitcase in her apartment, which was the one she would need if everything else failed. She sat at her desk. She placed her mother's photograph in its corner. She took one breath, deep, slow, deliberate, and opened her laptop. She worked. For 3 hours, she did the job she had been hired to do. She reconciled figures. She flagged discrepancies in the appropriate internal format. She submitted a partial report through the proper channels with correct documentation and professional language. She was not hiding. She was not performing normalcy. She was simply a woman who believed that your last day of work, if it came to that, should look exactly like every other day. Dignified. Complete. Unimpeachable. Sua, the junior analyst 3 desks away, brought her a small container of tteokbokki from the cart outside the building around 10:30. She set it on the edge of Imani's desk without saying much, just a small, slightly uncertain smile. "You looked like you didn't eat this morning," Sua said. Imani looked at her. 26. Maybe 27. Smart eyes. The kind of careful that develops when you are young and female in a room that rewards neither. "Thank you," Imani said, and meant it. Sua nodded quickly and went back to her desk. Imani ate 3 pieces of the tteokbokki. It was good. The spice was real and the rice cakes were soft, and it was the kind of simple, generous thing that reminded her that people, even in buildings full of politics and buried secrets, were still mostly people. Her mother had loved this food. She had made a version of it sometimes, at home in Atlanta, with modifications that her Atlanta neighbors found baffling and that Imani had grown up eating without question. She ate the tteokbokki and she thought about her mother and she kept her face exactly still. At 11:15, Juno's office door opened. He came out slowly this time. Not the purposeful walk of a CEO, not the aimless walk of a man getting coffee. This was something else, a walk that had a destination but did not want to arrive. He crossed the floor. He stopped at her desk. The floor was not quite at peak morning activity. A few people were in the glass conference rooms, a few were on calls with headsets, most were at their screens. But there were easily 20 people within eye line of where Juno was standing. Imani looked up at him. His face was arranged in the careful professional neutral she had learned to read in their 6 weeks of proximity. But there was something underneath it today that the careful neutral was not quite covering. He looked at her. He looked at the photograph for just a half second, the way he always did when he thought she would not catch it. She always caught it. "Miss Carter," he said. The floor did not go completely silent, but it went that particular semi-quiet where people stop generating new sound while pretending they are not listening. "Your contract is terminated, effective immediately." And just like that, she was back in the moment this story began. Except now you know what she knew, what she carried, and what was already in motion before he said a single word. The question is not whether she survived it. You already know she walked out of that building with her head up. The question is what she said to him in that parking garage, and whether he had any idea how much she already knew. She said 3 words. Shin Juno was standing in the parking garage with his bow still settling back into his spine, his composure still gone, his tie loosened, and the expression of a man who had run across a concrete floor because something in him refused to let her leave without explanation. He had said, "Please, come back. I will explain everything." And Imani Carter had looked at him for a long, still moment, long enough that he had begun to wonder if she was going to speak at all, and then she had said, very quietly, "I already know." He went very still. Not the professional stillness he used in boardrooms. A different kind. The kind that happens when a sentence lands somewhere deep and rearranges things. "What do you know?" he asked. Carefully. "I know why I was hired," she said. "And I know why I was fired." She paused. "And I know it wasn't your idea." He looked at her. She held the photograph of her mother with both hands now, flat against her chest, and she looked back at him with a steady, unreadable quality that had unsettled him from the first day she sat down in his building. "My mother," she said, "was Dorothy Carter." The name moved across his face like weather. He did not pretend he didn't know it. She would have lost respect for him if he had pretended. "I know who your mother was," he said. "Then you know why I'm here." A beat. "Yes," he said. "I do." The sound of a car entering the far end of the parking garage reached them both. The sweep of headlights moved across the concrete wall. Neither of them looked away from each other. "You ran after me," she said. Not an accusation. A statement. The kind she let sit in the air without adding anything to it. He looked at the floor for just a moment, a brief drop of his gaze that she understood was not weakness but honesty. Then he looked back up. "I have been running from this for a long time," he said. "I did not want to add today to the list." She studied him. She had built walls around her judgment of this man over 6 weeks. Professional walls, necessary walls, the kind women build when they are working in a space where being seen too clearly carries risk. But there was something in what he had just said that was too specific and too costly to be performance. He was not apologizing to save the company's position. He was apologizing because he could not live with not apologizing. She recognized that. She knew what it looked like to carry something you couldn't set down. The headlights belonged to a black sedan that pulled to a smooth stop 20 feet from where they were standing. The engine cut. The driver's door opened. A man got out, not the driver, a second man from the back seat, and he walked toward them with the measured pace of someone who had all the time in the world because time had arranged itself in his favor. Chairman Park Sung-jin was 71 years old and dressed in a quiet charcoal suit with no tie. He was not tall. He had the kind of presence that does not need height. He stopped beside Imani and looked at Juno with an expression that contained no warmth and no hostility, just recognition. 2 men who had operated in the same city for decades, circling the same industry, and had finally arrived at the same point on the map. "Shin Juno," Chairman Park said. A greeting that was also a statement of position. Juno's jaw tightened slightly. His eyes moved between Imani and the chairman. "Park Sung-jin," he said. "I believe you know why I'm here," Chairman Park said. "I am beginning to understand," Juno said. The chairman looked at Imani. "Are you ready?" She looked at Juno one more time. He was watching her with an expression she could not fully classify, something between what she had seen in his eyes through the blinds that first morning, and something older and less defended. Like a man standing at a door he had kept locked for a very long time, finding out that someone else already had a key. "Before I go," she said to Juno, "I need you to understand something." He waited. "I did not come here to destroy your company," she said. "I came here because my mother spent 30 years carrying something that did not belong to her. She found the truth and she was removed for it, and she brought the silence home and she wore it every day until she died." She paused. "I am not asking you to destroy anything. I am asking for the truth to finally be in the right place." The parking garage was very quiet. Juno looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something she had not expected him to say. "Come back inside," he said. "Not as an intern." A pause. "Come back inside so we can do this correctly." Chairman Park made a small sound that might have been approval. "Your father will not allow that," Imani said. "I am aware," Juno said. My father and I are going to have a conversation that is 32 years overdue. She did not go back inside that day. She was not ready to, and she was not naive enough to walk back into a building where she had just been publicly terminated without understanding exactly what the new terms were. She told Juno she needed 24 hours. He nodded like a man who understood that trust, once broken in public, is not rebuilt in a parking garage. She left with Chairman Park. They sat in the back of his car as it moved through Seoul traffic, and he laid out what he was proposing. The position at Myri Solutions. The mandate. The financial report. The public record of Dorothy Carter's original findings. She listened completely, the way her mother had taught her. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. I have one condition, she said. He turned to look at her. I'll tell you the condition, she said. But first I need to know something from you. Ask, he said. The American company, she said. The one in Atlanta. The silent partner listed in the dissolution documents. She looked at him steadily. How long have you known that name? The chairman was quiet for 3 full seconds. And in those 3 seconds, the expression on his face shifted in a way that told Imani Carter everything she needed to know about how much more complicated this was going to get. A long time, he said finally. Then you know what my condition is, she said. He looked at her. And for the first time in this conversation, for perhaps the first time in a very long time, Chairman Park Sungjin did not look like a man with the advantage. She had come to Seoul to finish what her mother started. But what she was beginning to understand, sitting in the back of that car with the city moving past the windows, was that the thing her mother had found in 1987 had roots that went all the way back to Atlanta. All the way back to people she loved. And the truth, when it fully surfaced, was not going to spare anyone who had been standing near it. If this story is moving something in you, if you recognize Imani's quiet strength, her refusal to be diminished, her love for her mother, then you are exactly who this channel was built for. Subscribe, as everything you know of this story is about to change. Chairman Park's car stopped in front of a building Imani had not been to before. Not Myri Solutions headquarters. Something smaller. A private meeting space in Yongsan. The kind of address that does not appear on company websites, that exists specifically for conversations that cannot happen in official rooms. 2 security personnel stood outside the entrance with the practiced stillness of men who had been doing this for a long time. Imani got out of the car and looked at the building. Then she looked at Chairman Park. You said we were going to your office, she said. I said we were going somewhere we could speak freely, he replied. This is that place. She did not move immediately. She stood on the pavement and made a quiet calculation, the kind of calculation she had been making her entire professional life in rooms where she was the only person who looked like her. She assessed the exits. She assessed the chairman's body language. She assessed the distance between where she was standing and the nearest public street. Then she walked inside. Because she had not come this far to stop at a door. The interior was a single large room with a long table, for chairs, and a window that looked onto a private courtyard. No artwork on the walls. No branded signage. Just clean lines and quiet light and the kind of deliberate emptiness that said, whatever happens in this room stays in this room. A third person was already seated at the table. A woman. Korean, mid-50s, with close-cropped hair and reading glasses pushed up on her head. She had a laptop open and a thick physical file on the table in front of her. She looked up when Imani entered. This is Attorney Kwon My-aung, Chairman Park said. She has been working on this matter for 11 years. Imani looked at Attorney Kwon. Attorney Kwon looked back at her with the direct, unhurried gaze of someone who had been waiting a long time for this meeting and intended to make every minute of it count. 11 years, Imani said. Sit down, Miss Carter, Attorney Kwon said. Not unkindly. We have a great deal to cover. Imani sat. For the next 40 minutes, Attorney Kwon laid out what 11 years of investigation had produced. The irregular transfers, Imani's own recent findings confirmed and extended what Kwon already had from earlier years. The dissolved American company in Atlanta. The money that had moved between Seoul and Atlanta across a decade, buried in subsidiary reports, cleaned through a mid-tier import-export operation that existed primarily on paper. Imani listened without interrupting. She asked 2 questions, both precise. Attorney Kwan answered both without hesitation. Then Chairman Park leaned forward and folded his hands on the table. "What we do not have," he said, "is the original documentation from 1987. The internal Shin Global records from that year were archived and sealed. We have copies of some external-facing documents, but the internal analyst reports, the ones that would show who knew what and when, those are sealed inside Shin Global's classified archive." He looked at Imani. "Your mother's file," Imani said. "Your mother's file," he confirmed. "And everything attached to it." The room was quiet. "You need me to get it," Imani said. "We need Shin Juno to release it," Attorney Kwan said. "Voluntarily. A legal challenge to the seal would take 18 months and signal our position to the board before we are ready." She paused. "But if the current CEO were to authorize the release personally, as a matter of internal transparency?" "You think Juno will do that?" Imani said. Chairman Park said nothing. He just looked at her with the expression of a man who had correctly read a situation and was waiting for the person across from him to catch up. Imani thought about the parking garage. The bow. The 3 full seconds of it. The way he had said, "I have been running from this for a long time." She thought about the coffee he had brought to her desk without being asked. She thought about the way his face had gone when she said her mother's name. "He already knows it's wrong," she said quietly. Not to the room. To herself. "Knowing something is wrong and acting on it are very different things," Attorney Kwan said. "Especially when the person you would be acting against is your father." Imani looked at the sealed physical file on the table in front of Attorney Kwan. It was thick. Years of careful work, accumulated and organized and waiting. She thought about her condition. The one she had told Chairman Park she had. "I'll go back," she said. "But not as an employee of Myri Solutions. Not under your mandate." She looked at the chairman steadily. "I go back as myself. As Dorothy Carter's daughter. And I speak to Juno directly, without your organization's name attached to it." Chairman Park was quiet for a moment. "That leaves you without institutional protection," he said. "I've been without institutional protection my entire career," she said. "I know how to work that way." Attorney Kwan made a small sound. Not quite a laugh. Something warmer than that. She wrote something on her notepad. "Your condition," Chairman Park said. "Tell me now." "When this is over," Imani said, "when the record is corrected and Dorothy Carter's findings are officially acknowledged, I want it done in a public forum. Not a press release. Not a footnote in a regulatory filing." She paused. "I want it said out loud by someone with authority, in a room where it can be witnessed. My mother deserved that when she was alive. She will have it now." The chairman looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded once. "Agreed," he said. Imani stood. She picked up her bag. She looked at Attorney Kwan. "Send me everything you have on the Atlanta connection," she said. "All of it. I need to understand the full picture before I walk back into that building." Attorney Kwan closed her laptop. "It will be in your encrypted folder within the hour." Imani walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame and turned back. "One more thing," she said. "The name on the Atlanta dissolution documents. The silent partner." She looked at Chairman Park. "Does Juno know that name?" The chairman's expression shifted in the small, careful way of a man deciding how much to say. "No," he said. "He does not." "Then when he finds out," she said, "it is going to change everything he thinks he understands about why his father made the choices he made." She walked out. Behind her, Attorney Kwan looked at Chairman Park. "She is exactly what this case needed," Kwan said quietly. "She is exactly what her mother was," Park said. 37 years too late and right on time. That evening, Imani sat in her apartment and opened the encrypted folder. She read for 2 hours. When she reached the section on the Atlanta silent partner, the full corporate record, the financial trail, the dates, she had to set her phone down and stand at the window for a while. Because the name was not just a name from her community. It was the name of the man who had delivered the eulogy at her mother's funeral. The man who had held Imani's hand at the graveside and told her that Dorothy Carter was the strongest woman he had ever known. The man who had been stealing from her mother's credibility for 37 years while standing close enough to wipe her tears. Imani stood at the window for a long time. Then she made a decision that nobody who knew her would have called surprising, and one that everyone who underestimated her was completely unprepared for. She picked up her phone and called Juno. He answered on the second ring. "I'm ready," she said. "Tomorrow morning. Your office. Just you." A pause. "I'll be there," he said. She hung up. She looked at her mother's photograph on the nightstand. "I found him, Mama," she said quietly. "I found out who it was." The photograph looked back at her with Dorothy Carter's steady eyes. And somewhere across the city, in the Shin family residence in Songbuk-dong, Shin Byung-chul's phone rang at 11:15 at night, and the voice on the other end was a voice from Atlanta that had not called him in over a decade. "She knows," the voice said. Two people on opposite sides of a buried truth were about to sit down together. And a man in Atlanta, a man who had attended Dorothy Carter's funeral and wept real tears, was making phone calls in the dark trying to stop what was already in motion. But Imani Carter had not come to Seoul to be stopped. This channel is for women who have learned the hard way that dignity matters. If that sounds like you, subscribe and keep watching. You do not want to miss what happens in that office tomorrow morning. He was already there when she arrived. That was the first thing she noticed. Shin Juno's corner office, 7:40 in the morning, and he was not sitting behind his desk in the posture of authority. He was standing at the window with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled to the elbows and a cup of coffee in his hand, looking out at the Han River the way a man looks at something when he has been awake most of the night thinking. He turned when she opened the door. She had dressed carefully that morning. Not to impress. To be seen clearly. A deep burgundy blouse, dark trousers, her mother's small gold earrings. She had looked at herself in the mirror before she left the apartment and thought, "This is who you are, and you are walking into that office as all of it." She sat down across from his desk. He sat down behind it. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The city moved outside the window behind him. The office floor below was still mostly empty. It was early, deliberately early, because she had not wanted witnesses for this conversation, and he had understood that without her saying so. "My father called me last night," Juno said. "He knows you met with Park Sungjin." "I expected that," she said. "He told me to have security remove you from the building if you returned." "But you let me in." "I let you in," he said. He set his coffee cup down and looked at her directly. "Tell me what you know," he said. "All of it. Not what you are prepared to use publicly. What you actually know." She studied him. This was the moment where she decided how much to trust a man who had publicly fired her 48 hours ago on his father's order, a man who had run across a parking garage to bow an apology, a man who had brought her coffee and noticed the photograph on her desk from the very first day. She had not built her career on blind trust. She had built it on reading people accurately. She had read Shin Juno for 6 weeks. "My mother found the irregular transfers in 1987, she began. She documented them. She reported them internally and was redirected. She identified the external company receiving the funds, an Atlanta-based import-export firm. She was removed before she could escalate." She paused. "Your father removed her because she was right." Juno's jaw was tight, but he did not look away. "The Atlanta company was a shell," she continued. "It existed primarily to receive and clean the transferred funds. It had 2 visible officers and 1 silent partner. The silent partner is an Atlanta man named Reverend Gerald Beaumont." Something crossed Juno's face. "You know that name," she said. "My father mentioned that name once," Juno said slowly. "When I was in university. He said it was an American business contact from the early years. Someone who helped facilitate an import relationship." He stopped. "I never heard the name again after that." "Reverend Beaumont attended my mother's funeral," Imani said. The silence that followed was complete. Juno sat very still. "He held my hand at the graveside," she said, keeping her voice even. "He told me my mother was the strongest woman he had ever known. He said it while standing in the cemetery of a woman he had helped silence. She looked at Juno steadily. That is who your father protected in 1987. That is the greater thing he was guarding when he removed Dorothy Carter. Juno stood up. He turned to the window. He stood there with his back to her for a long moment, and she could see the line of his shoulders and the way he was breathing. Measured, deliberate, the discipline of a man holding something very large with both hands. When he turned back, his face had changed. Not broken. Resolved. What do you need from me? He said. The sealed file, she said. Dorothy Carter, 1987. I need you to authorize its release. He nodded slowly. If I do that, it becomes part of an official record. My father will know immediately. Yes, she said. It will destabilize the board. There are members who have known about this for years. Releasing that file will force every one of them to choose a side. Yes, she said again. He looked at her. You understand what you are asking me to do to my own family. She did not soften it. He deserved the full weight of it. I understand, she said. And I am asking anyway. Because your family's stability was built on my mother's silence. And she is gone now. And I am here instead. The room held that. Juno sat back down. He pulled his keyboard toward him. He opened an internal system she could see reflected in his glasses. His hands paused over the keys. My father told me something last night, he said. On the phone. He said, and I want to say this exactly, he said, the Carter woman made a choice in 1987. She chose to push. Consequences follow choices. Imani looked at him. He said that about my mother. He said that about your mother. Juno's voice was very quiet. And I want you to know that when he said it, I understood for the first time that I have been building my life on top of a justification that was never true. He pressed the authorization key. The screen changed. It will take 20 minutes for the file to unseal in the system, he said. My father will be notified in 30. Then we have 30 minutes, she said. What do we do with 30 minutes? He asked. She reached into her bag and placed a sealed envelope on his desk. Thick, worn at the edges from years of careful storage. You read these, she said. My mother's letters from 1987. She paused. She wrote about your father. But she also wrote about a young man she saw once in the building, the founder's son, visiting from school. She said he looked like a boy who had been told his whole life what he was supposed to become, and she wondered if he ever thought about what he actually wanted. Juno looked at the envelope without touching it. She saw me, he said quietly. She saw everyone, Imani said. He picked up the envelope carefully, the way you pick up something that has been waiting a long time to be held. He looked at the handwriting on the front. He did not open it immediately. He just held it. And Imani Carter, who had held herself together across 6 weeks and 2 countries and a lifetime of her mother's unfinished business, felt something loosen slightly in the center of her chest. Not resolved. Not healed. Just loosened. Like the first breath after a very long time of not fully breathing. It lasted approximately 90 seconds. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. His face closed. My father, he said. She straightened. Answer it. He picked up. He listened for 15 seconds. His expression did not change. His posture did not change. Then he said, in Korean, 5 words that she did not need translated, because she could hear in the tone and the shape of them that they were 5 words Shin Juno had never said to his father in his entire life. He set the phone down face down on the desk. He looked at her. He is coming here, Juno said. He will be in this building in 40 minutes. Imani nodded slowly. Good, she said. Shin Byung-chul was on his way. The sealed file was already opening. And somewhere in Atlanta, Reverend Gerald Beaumont had just boarded a flight to Seoul, because a man who has spent 37 years protecting a secret does not sit still when the walls start coming down. Reverend Gerald Beaumont landed at Incheon Airport at 6:20 in the morning, 2 days after Imani's conversation in Juno's office. He had not told anyone he was coming. Not his congregation in Atlanta. Not the deacons who managed the church calendar. Not the woman he had been seeing for 4 years who cooked for him on Sunday evenings and believed, completely, that he was a man of God and nothing more complicated than that. He had packed one bag. He had told his assistant he was taking a personal retreat. He was 68 years old, broad-shouldered, with white at his temples and the kind of face that had spent decades being trusted. He had a voice built for comfort. Low, warm, the kind of voice that made people feel held when they were falling apart. He had used that voice at more bedsides and gravesites than he could count. He had used it at Dorothy Carter's funeral with genuine grief. Because he had, in his own way, loved Dorothy. That was the part that made everything else worse. He cleared customs and took a private car to a hotel in Mapogu. He checked in under a different name, an old habit from years ago, when the Atlanta business had required discretion. He ordered room service. He sat at the window and looked at the Han River and thought about the sequence of events that had brought him here. He had known, when Shin Byung-chul called him 10 days ago to say that an intern named Carter had appeared in the building, that this day was coming. He had known it the way old men know things, not with surprise, but with a tired recognition of a consequence that has been traveling toward you for a very long time. He had hoped it would come after he was gone. It had not. Imani learned he was in Seoul from attorney Kwon, who had a contact at Incheon who monitored arrivals on a list of names relevant to the case. The notification came through her encrypted folder at 7 in the morning. She read it standing in her kitchen. She had known this moment would come. She had told herself she was prepared for it. She had rehearsed, in the private theater of her own mind, how she would feel when Gerald Beaumont's name appeared in the same city as her. She was not prepared. She sat down at the kitchen table and pressed both hands flat against the surface and breathed. She thought about the man who had taught her to ride a bicycle in the church parking lot when she was 7 because her mother was working. The man who had written her a college recommendation letter that she still had somewhere in a box in Atlanta. The man who had, at her mother's funeral, held her face gently in both of his large hands and said, "Your mother was the most honest person I ever knew. Don't you ever be anything less than she was." She had nodded. She had believed him. She breathed. Then she picked up her phone and called Juno. "Beaumont is in Seoul," she said when he answered. A pause. "How long have you known he might come?" Juno asked. "I suspected it when I found his name. I confirmed it when I understood how much he had to lose." She paused. "He didn't come to confess. He came to contain." "Who would he go to?" Juno asked. "My father." "Your father is the only person in this city he trusts," she said. "And your father is the only person in this city with enough remaining authority to slow down what is already in motion." Another pause. "I need to meet with my father today," Juno said, "before Beaumont reaches him." "I know," she said. "I need to be in that meeting." The silence that followed was the silence of a man calculating risk, not for himself, but for her. She recognized the quality of it. "My father is not going to respond well to that," Juno said. "Your father has been not responding well to Carter women for 37 years, she said. "I think he can manage one more meeting." They met at the Shin family residence at 2 in the afternoon. Imani had been inside many powerful men's homes over the course of her career. She knew how to move through spaces designed to communicate wealth and authority without being moved by them. She walked into Shin Byung-chul's residence with her back straight and Dorothy's earrings in her ears, and she did not let her eyes widen at the art on the walls or the scale of the rooms. Byung-chul was in the main sitting room. He was smaller than she had imagined. She had built him large in her mind, the figure from her mother's letters, the founder, the man who had made the decision. But he was 74 and sitting, and the years had settled on him the way they settle on all men eventually, narrowing the physical space they occupy even as the weight of their decisions remains full size. He looked at her when she entered. He did not look at her the way she had feared, with coldness or contempt, or the particular dismissiveness she had experienced in too many rooms. He looked at her with something she had not anticipated, recognition, and something adjacent to grief. "You have her eyes," he said. In English, clearly, for her benefit. Imani sat down across from him without being invited to. Juno sat beside her. The positioning was not accidental. My mother had her own eyes, Imani said. I have mine. Byung-chul was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I know why you are here. I know what Juno has done with the file. I know about Park Sungjin. He paused. I am not here to fight you. Imani waited. I made a decision in 1987 that I have justified to myself in different ways at different times in my life, he said. I told myself it was business. I told myself it was necessary. I told myself your mother would recover and move on and build a different life. He looked down at his hands. She did build a different life. That is not the same as saying I did not damage the one she had planned. The room was very still. Gerald Beaumont called me 2 days ago, Byung-chul continued. He asked me to find a way to stop this. To delay it, at minimum. To find a mechanism that would allow the record to remain sealed. He looked up. I told him I would think about it. And have you thought about it? Imani said. I have thought about almost nothing else for 2 days. A pause. Gerald Beaumont was not the reason I removed your mother. He was a component, a business relationship that had become complicated. Your mother's findings threatened to expose that relationship, and I chose the relationship over the truth. He said it plainly. No decoration. No legal distancing. I chose my business interests over a young woman who had done her job with complete integrity. Juno was very still beside her. Imani looked at the old man across from her and understood something she had not been prepared to understand. He was not a monster. He was a man who had made a monstrous choice and had carried it, not lightly, for 37 years. That did not make it right. It did not reduce the damage. It did not give Dorothy back her career, or her peace, or the 30 years of silence she had worn home to Atlanta. But it was the truth. And the truth, plain, undecorated, spoken out loud, was what she had come to Seoul for. Where is Beaumont now? She asked. Byung-chul's expression shifted. He arrived this morning, he said. I have not yet spoken with him. But he will come here, she said. Yes. Then I need to be here when he does, she said. Byung-chul looked at his son. Juno met his father's eyes. Something passed between them. Something old and unresolved and, for perhaps the first time, being resolved. Yes, Byung-chul said. He looked back at Imani. You are very much like her, he said. I mean that with full respect. I know you do, she said. But I need you to say it to more than me. Reverend Gerald Beaumont was in a hotel 2 miles away, making phone calls and believing there was still time. There was not still time. And when he walked through the door of the Shin family residence 3 hours later and found Imani Carter sitting in the chair across from the man he had trusted for 37 years, the expression on his face would say everything his voice was not prepared to say. He walked in at 5:17. Imani heard him before she saw him, the particular cadence of Gerald Beaumont's footsteps, a sound so woven into her childhood that her body recognized it before her mind processed it. Slow, deliberate, the walk of a man who had learned that entering a room slowly gave him time to read it before it read him. The sitting room door opened. He saw Byung-chul first. Then Juno. Then his gaze moved to the chair in the corner. When he saw Imani, he stopped. Not a stumble. Not a gasp. Just a complete, total stop. The kind that happens when a person encounters something their body had been preparing for and still was not ready to meet. He was 68 years old and dressed well, as he always dressed. Dark suit, no tie, the small gold cross at his collar that he had worn for as long as Imani could remember. He looked, as he had always looked, like a man you would trust with your worst day. The difference was that Imani could now see, layered beneath the trustworthy surface, the thing that had always been underneath it. Fear. Imani, he said. Her name in his mouth sounded different now. Smaller. Reverend Beaumont, she said. She did not stand. He looked at Byung-chul. Something passed between them, the look of 2 men who had shared a secret for decades and were now watching it walk into the room with its own face. Sit down, Gerald, Byung-chul said. The use of his first name, not the formal address, not the professional title, seemed to deflate something in Beaumont. He sat in the chair nearest the door, which Imani noted was the furthest seat from her. "I see you've met my mother's daughter," she said. He looked at her. His eyes were the same eyes that had looked at her across a graveside and told her Dorothy Carter was the strongest woman he had ever known. They were also the eyes of a man who understood that every word he said now would be weighed against everything he had done. "I loved your mother," he said. "I know," she said. "Tell me about the company." He blinked. "The Atlanta Company," she said. "The import-export operation. Your silent partnership. The transfers from Shin Global." She kept her voice level and even the way her mother had kept her voice in the letters. "Slowly, baby, always slowly. Tell me how it started." He was quiet for a long time. Then, slowly, he began. It had started in 1982. Beaumont had been 36 years old, the pastor of a mid-sized Atlanta church that was growing faster than its finances. He had been introduced to Shin Byung-chul through a mutual business acquaintance, an American businessman with Korean trade connections. The relationship had been professional at first. Legitimate import work, real goods, real margins. Then the margins had stopped being enough for the company's primary investors, and the arrangement had evolved. Beaumont had told himself he was a passive participant. He had told himself he did not ask questions because asking questions was not his role. He had told himself the money went to the church, to the food bank, to the youth program, to the roof that needed replacing in 1985. Some of it had. Some of it had not. Dorothy Carter had joined Shin Global in 1986. She had been excellent. She had found the irregularities within 8 months. "She came to me," Beaumont said, his voice quieter now, "before she went to anyone at the company. She trusted me. She told me what she had found, and she asked me what she should do." Imani went very still. "She came to you," she repeated. "Yes. And you told her?" He looked at his hands. "I told her she might be misreading the format. That international subsidiary accounting had its own logic. I told her to give it more time before she escalated." He paused. "I told her those things because I needed more time. I called Byung-chul the same evening." The room was completely silent. Imani looked at Beaumont for a long time. She let herself feel the full weight of what he had just said. Her mother had gone to the person she trusted most. The person she trusted most had sent her back into the building with false reassurance and then made a phone call that ended her career. Dorothy Carter had not been betrayed by a stranger. She had been betrayed by someone who knew her name and her heart and her habit of trusting people who had earned it. "She never knew," Imani said. "She never found out it was you." "No," he said. "She died not knowing." "Yes." Imani stood up. She did not raise her voice. She had not come this far to raise her voice in a room full of men who were waiting, on some level, for her to become exactly what they could dismiss. She stood and she looked at Gerald Beaumont with the full, clear, unhurried attention of a woman who had waited 37 years, most of it without knowing she was waiting, for this moment. "My mother trusted you," she said. "And you used that trust to protect yourself. And then you stood at her funeral and you held my face and you told me to be like her." She paused. "I am going to take a moment to understand how you live with that." Beaumont did not answer. Juno was beside her, not touching her, not intervening, simply present. A steady weight at her right side that she was aware of in the way you are aware of something solid when the ground has stopped being certain. She turned to Byung-chul. "You said you were not here to fight me," she said. "I need you to say what you told me this afternoon, about my mother, about the choice you made, in front of him." She nodded toward Beaumont. "I need you to say it where he cannot reframe it later." Byung-chul looked at Beaumont. And then Shin Byung-chul, 74 years old, founder of Shin Global Industries, a man who had spent a lifetime behind the kind of composure that does not bend in public, looked directly at the man who had been his business partner and his secret keeper for 37 years and said, clearly and without hesitation, "Dorothy Carter was right. She found the truth. I removed her to protect an arrangement I should never have entered. That is the fact. I will not say otherwise going forward." Beaumont closed his eyes. Imani watched him. She had thought this moment would feel like victory. It did not feel like victory. It felt like the moment after a very long storm when the air is finally still and you can see clearly, and what you see is the full damage, and you understand, for the first time, how much rebuilding there is to do. She sat back down. She looked at Juno. He was watching her with an expression she did not try to classify. It was too large for a single word. She turned back to Beaumont. "I have one question," she said. "And I need you to answer it honestly. Not for the record. Not for the room." She paused. "Did my mother ever suspect it was you?" He was quiet for a long time. When he answered, his voice was barely above a whisper. "In her last year," he said. "She stopped calling me as often. She stopped. He stopped. I think she knew. I think she had known for a while and decided she did not want the confirmation." A long pause. "I think she chose to keep loving me rather than know for certain. Because that was who Dorothy was." Imani looked at her hands. Her mother had known, and had chosen love over the truth she had already spent a decade paying for. She did not know if that was grace or sorrow. She thought it was probably both. Imani had the confession. She had Byung-chul's admission. She had Gerald Beaumont sitting in a room with nowhere to go. But none of it was in the right place yet. None of it was in a form that would last. And tomorrow morning, Shin Juno was going to walk into the Shin Global boardroom and do something that would either honor everything his father had just said, or prove that words spoken in private mean nothing when power is on the line. The envelope had been in Byung-chul's possession for 34 years. He had not opened it. That was the first thing Imani needed to understand when Juno told her about it on the phone that night. His father had carried a sealed letter addressed to Dorothy Carter's daughter for over 3 decades and had never opened it. "He said she sent it to him," Juno told her. His voice was quiet, the quality of a man still absorbing something. "After she returned to Atlanta. A few months after she left Seoul. She sent it to the company address with a note that said it should be kept for her daughter." Imani was standing at the window of her apartment. The city was dark except for the layered lights below. "She sent it to him," she said. "Yes. She trusted him to keep it. Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Why are you telling me tonight?" "Because my father asked me to bring it to you. Tonight. He did not want to wait until tomorrow." A pause. "I think he has been waiting to give it to someone for a very long time." Juno came to her apartment at 9. He brought the envelope in his inside jacket pocket, close to his chest. The way you carry something you understand is not yours to hold for long. She opened the door. He held the envelope out to her without saying anything. She took it. She looked at the handwriting on the front. "For Imani. When she is ready." Her mother's hand. Her mother's particular way of forming the I in her name, slightly larger than the other letters, like a quiet insistence. She did not open it immediately. She set it on the kitchen table and looked at it. Juno sat down across from her, uninvited but somehow correct. She did not tell him to leave. She made tea. She did not ask him if he wanted any. She simply made 2 cups and put one in front of him, and he accepted it without comment, the way 2 people accept small gestures when the larger things are still too large to speak. Then she opened the envelope. It was 4 pages. Her mother's small, disciplined handwriting, on plain paper this time. Not airmail, not thin. Good paper. The kind you buy when you intend a letter to last. "My Imani. If you are reading this, then you found your way there. I always thought you would. You were never a child who left things unfinished, even the things that frightened you. I want to tell you what I found clearly and completely, so that you have it in my own words. Not because I think you need me to explain what the documents say, but because I want you to know that I understood exactly what I was looking at. I was not confused. I was not wrong. I knew what I found and I reported it and I was removed for it. And I want that written down in a place where it cannot be classified or sealed or archived away from you." She turned the page. The transfers were real. The company in Atlanta was real. The man who told me to wait. I think you may already know who that was by the time you read this. I spent a long time not wanting to know for certain. That was a choice I made. It was not the strongest choice. But it was the one that let me keep loving the people I loved, and I am not ashamed of it. What I am telling you is this. The truth does not expire. I could not finish this. You can. Not because you owe anyone justice. You do not owe anyone anything, not for my story. But because you are the kind of woman who finishes things. And I want you to finish this one knowing that your mother started it. That I was right. That I tried. Third page. There is one more thing. In the filing system, buried under a subsidiary code I wrote down in the margin of this letter, there is an internal report I submitted formally in March of 1987. My name is on it. Submission date. Everything. It was never reviewed. It is still in the system. I know because I checked, the year before I got sick, from a public database terminal at the Atlanta Library. Still there. Still sealed. Still mine. It is the proof that I did the right thing in the right way at the right time. It is the proof that they knew. Find it. Put it where people can see it. Fourth page. And then, baby, after all of that, I want you to do something your mother was never very good at. I want you to put it down. Not because it doesn't matter. Because it does matter and it is finished and you have the rest of your life to live in the forward direction. I love you more than this story. You are more than this story. Mama. P.S. In the corner of my desk at home, there is a small blue box. Open it when you are done. Imani sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Juno did not say anything. He held his cup and he sat with her in the kind of silence that is not empty but full of everything that has been carried and set down and understood. After a while, she folded the letter carefully and looked up. She knew there was an internal report still in the system, she said. Under a subsidiary code. She looked at the margin of the last page, where her mother had written a small string of numbers and letters in pencil. Juno looked at the code. He was quiet for a moment. I know that format, he said slowly. That is a legacy archive code. Pre-digitization. He looked up. Those records were never migrated to the current system. They are still in physical storage. In the basement archive of the Seoul headquarters. Can you access them? I am the CEO, he said. Yes. She looked at him. Tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow, he said. He stood to leave. He picked up his jacket. At the door, he stopped with his hand on the frame, an echo of the gesture she had made in a different doorway 2 days ago, and she recognized it. My father, he said without turning. What he said today. About your mother. He meant it. I know he meant it, she said. That is not the same as it being enough. I know, he said. What happens tomorrow, she said. In the boardroom, that is what makes it enough or not. He turned then. He looked at her with the full, unguarded expression of a man who had stopped performing composure for the night. I will not fail her, he said. Imani looked back at him. You will not fail her, she said. Not an echo. A statement. The kind she meant completely. He left. She sat alone with her mother's letter and the code in the margin and the knowledge that tomorrow, the physical proof her mother had placed in a company system 37 years ago, her name, her submission date, her correct findings, never reviewed, never acknowledged, was finally going to be lifted into the light. She thought about the blue box at her mother's home in Atlanta. She had not opened it. She had not known to look. She picked up her phone and called Rochelle. Go to Mama's house, she said when Rochelle answered. Corner of her desk. There's a small blue box. Silence on the other end. Then, Imani, baby, what's happening over there? Something good, she said. Something that should have happened a long time ago. Rochelle was quiet for a moment. Then, I'll go tonight. Thank you, Imani said. Call me when you have it. She hung up. She looked out the window at Seoul. And in Shin Global's basement archive, 37 years undisturbed, Dorothy Carter's internal report sat in a physical folder with her name on the cover page and her findings written in full and her submission date stamped in red. Waiting to be found by the people who already knew she was right. Tomorrow morning, Shin Juno was going to walk into the boardroom with his mother's, with Dorothy Carter's, original report in his hands. And Shin Byung-chul was going to walk in beside him. And the board members who had known for years were going to have nowhere left to hide. And Imani Carter was going to stand at the head of that table, in the same room where her mother had once sat, small and uncertain and completely correct. If you've walked through something hard and came out still standing, this channel was made for you. The final reckoning is here. And what Imani does at the end of it will surprise every single person in that room. She stood at the head of the boardroom table, and she did not sit down. That was the first thing the board members noticed when they filed in at 9 in the morning, that the chair at the top of the table, the chair that belonged to the CEO, was empty, and a woman was standing beside it. Not behind it, beside it. As if she and the chair had an understanding about who was in charge of the next hour. There were 11 board members. 8 had been with Shin Global for more than a decade. 3 of those 8 had been on the board in 1987. They looked at her. They looked at Juno, who stood to her right. They looked at Shin Byung-chul, who sat, not at the head of the table, not in his usual position, but midway down, beside his son's empty chair, like a man who had decided that this morning he would take up less space than he was accustomed to. No one had been told, officially, what this meeting was about. They were beginning to understand. Attorney Kwon My-aung sat against the wall with a laptop and a recording device. Chairman Park Sung-jin was not in the room, at Imani's request. This was not his moment. This was a Shin Global matter. It needed to be resolved inside the building where it had begun. Imani waited until all 11 board members were seated. Then she placed Dorothy Carter's original 1987 internal report in the center of the table. The physical folder. Retrieved that morning from the basement archive, exactly where the subsidiary code in Dorothy's letter had placed it. Juno had carried it up himself, in both hands, and set it on the conference table with a care that several of the board members had watched without understanding. Yet, "My name is Imani Carter," she said. "My mother was Dorothy Anissa Carter. In 1987, she was a junior financial analyst on this floor. She submitted a formal internal report documenting irregular financial transfers. That report is in the folder in front of you. Her name is on the cover page. The submission date is stamped in red. The report was never reviewed. She was terminated within 6 weeks." She let that sit in the room. "I am not here to file a lawsuit," she said. "I am not here to negotiate a settlement. I am not here for money." She paused. "I am here because my mother did her job with complete integrity, in this building, in this city, and the record has been wrong for 37 years. Today, the record is going to be corrected." One of the older board members, a man in his late 60s who had been with the company since the early years, shifted in his seat. He started to speak. "With respect. You will have time," she said, quietly and without breaking. "I am not finished." He closed his mouth. Juno did not move. Byung-chul looked at his hands. "Shin Byung-chul will speak," she said. "What he says will be recorded. After he speaks, I will invite any board member who was present in 1987 to add their own statement to the record." She looked at the 3 older board members in turn. "This is not an ambush. This is an opportunity. The opportunity to be on the right side of a 37-year-old wrong before it becomes a matter of public record through other channels." The room understood what other channels meant. Byung-chul stood up. He was smaller standing than he looked in photographs. The age had done that, settled him into a more human scale. He stood at his place midway down the table, and he looked at the report in the folder, and then he looked at the room. "In 1987, he said, a young woman on this floor found evidence of financial misconduct connected to an external American company. She reported it correctly through proper internal channels. She was removed from her position because her findings were accurate, and their accuracy was inconvenient to a business arrangement I had entered and did not wish to expose." He paused. "Her name was Dorothy Carter. She was right. I was wrong. That is the fact, and I will sign any document that makes it part of this company's permanent record." The boardroom was completely silent. One of the 3 older board members lowered his head. He did not speak. He did not need to. The lowering of his head said everything about what he had known and chosen not to say for 3 decades. Imani watched him. She did not feel triumph. She felt something quieter and more durable than triumph. She felt the particular satisfaction of a thing being placed correctly, the way a piece fits into a puzzle and you feel it in your hands before you see it with your eyes. Then came the moment nobody had anticipated. Juno picked up a second document from the table, one he had prepared, she had not known about, had not seen before this moment, and he held it up. "This is my letter of resignation as CEO of Shin Global Industries," he said. The room erupted. Not in shouting. This was a Korean boardroom full of people trained since childhood to keep their reactions below a certain volume. But the murmur that went through those 11 people had the texture of shock. Chairs moved. Eyes moved. The oldest board member made a sound he immediately suppressed. Imani looked at Juno. He was looking at her. "I am not resigning because I am ashamed of this company," he said, to the room but still looking at her. "I am resigning because the next chapter of this company needs to be built on a foundation that I cannot lay while I am still the man who carried out a termination order without asking why." He paused. "I asked why too late. I can live with that. But I cannot rebuild trust, inside this company, inside this industry, while I am still in the chair." Another pause. "The board will appoint an interim CEO. I will cooperate fully with Attorney Kwan's investigation. And I will spend the next chapter of my life doing the kind of work that does not require a title." He set the resignation letter on the table. He looked at Imani. She had not known he was going to do this. She had not asked for it. She had not needed it. But she understood why he had done it. Not for her. Not for the record. For himself. Because Shin Juno had spent 44 years becoming exactly what his father's company needed him to be. And this was the first major decision of his life that belonged entirely to him. She gave him the smallest nod. The kind that says, "I see you. That was yours to give." And it was right. After the meeting, after the board members had filed out with their silence and their shifted expressions and the particular heaviness of people who have been asked to carry truth they previously buried, Imani stood alone in the boardroom for a while. She stood in the place where her mother had once sat. She looked at the Han River through the window. She held Dorothy's letter in her hands. Rochelle had called that morning, before the meeting. She had found the blue box. Inside it was a small, folded note in Dorothy's handwriting, and a single photograph. Not the one Imani carried, a different one. Earlier. Dorothy in Seoul, 1987, young and bright-eyed and standing outside this building in a winter coat, squinting into the sun, smiling the way you smile when the future is still completely open. On the back of the photograph, her mother had written 4 words. "I was here first." Imani had read those 4 words standing in her kitchen at 7 in the morning, and she had pressed the photograph to her chest and she had cried. Not the contained, functional kind of cry she had managed in private over the last weeks, but the real kind. The kind that has been accumulating for years and finally finds the door. She had cried for about 4 minutes. Then she had washed her face and put on Dorothy's earrings and come to the boardroom. She was still standing at the window when Juno came back in. He had taken off his jacket. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee. He set one on the table beside her without saying anything, the way he had set one on her desk 6 weeks ago, and she thought, some things about a person are true all the way through. "What are you going to do now?" he asked. She looked at the river. "Go home," she said. "Open the blue box in person. Sit with Rochelle for a while. Eat something that isn't tteokbokki from a street cart." She paused. "Sleep." He smiled. It was not the practiced professional smile she had seen in board meetings. It was smaller and more real, and it changed his face in a way that made him look younger and less constructed. "And after that," he said. She turned and looked at him. "I don't know yet," she said. "I came here for one thing. I got it. What comes after that is a new story." He looked at her for a long moment. "I will be in Atlanta in 3 months," he said. "There is a business matter that requires—" He stopped. He tried again. "I would like to see you in Atlanta. In 3 months. Not for business." She looked at him steadily. "Ask me again in 3 months," she said. "When you're not a man who just resigned from a company, and I'm not a woman who just concluded a 37-year mission." Ask me when we are just two people with an ordinary Tuesday in front of us." He nodded. 3 months, he said. She picked up her coffee. She looked at the room one more time. The long table, the empty chairs, the folder with her mother's name on the cover page sitting exactly where it belonged. She thought about the life lesson her mother had tried to teach her quietly, through every letter and every silence and every choice that seemed like giving up and was actually something else entirely. Dignity is not something anyone can take from you. It is only something you can give away. Dorothy Carter had never given it away. Not once. Not in the letter to her mother. Not in the letters Imani had read by lamplight. Not in the final note she had left in a blue box for a daughter she trusted to find her way back. "I was here first." Imani walked out of the boardroom with a photograph in her hand, and her mother's earrings in her ears, and the full, steady weight of a woman who has finished what she came to do and is not yet sure what she is going to become next, but is absolutely certain she will become it on her own terms. The fight for Dorothy Carter was over. But dignity, real dignity, the kind that costs something and survives anyway, does not retire when one battle ends. It simply finds the next room that needs it. And somewhere, in a city she had not yet visited, in a building she had not yet walked into, another woman was sitting at a desk with a truth in her hands and no one willing to look at it. The story was not over. It was only this chapter that had ended. If you have ever carried something that belonged to someone you loved and refused to put it down until it was in the right place, this story was for you. Dorothy Carter found the truth. Imani Carter brought it home. This channel is for women who do not give their dignity away. Not for anyone. Not at any price. If that is you, subscribe. Come back. There are more stories like this one waiting. And the next woman who refuses to be erased deserves to be heard just as much as the last. We tell these stories here. I hope you'll stay. Thank you for watching Afro Korean Tales and Stories. As we close this story, I want to say something to the women watching. Some of you have lived through moments like this. Moments where you had to stand alone. Moments where you chose dignity over comfort. Moments where you refused to be bought, silenced, or pushed aside. That kind of strength doesn't always make noise, but it changes rooms. If you are a woman who believes respect is worth more than money, if you believe character still matters, if you believe dignity should never be negotiated, then this channel was made for you. I tell stories about women who stand firm, women who earn respect without begging for it, women who remind powerful people that integrity cannot be purchased. If that speaks to you, I invite you to subscribe and become part of this community. And if this story touched you, comment the word dignity below. I read your comments, and they help these stories reach more women like you. Until the next story, remember, not every powerful person leads with honor, but every strong woman carries it within her. I'll see you in the next one.